Chapter 1: Hekla's Folly. The twin otter screamed a protest against the air itself. Kalen Rourke's teeth vibrated with the drone of the engines, his gaze fixed through the small, iced-over porthole. Below, a world of pure, hostile geometry unfolded. White plains fractured into jagged pressure ridges of blue ice. The ocean, a menacing black, churned with flows the size of houses. There was no softness here, no room for error. It was precisely what he had paid a fortune to find. Almost there, Mr. Rourke. The pilot, a young man named Harris with an appropriately weathered face, yelled over the engine noise. He pointed ahead. "You see it, Hekla's Folly." Kalen squinted. A dark smudge corrupted the endless white horizon. It grew slowly, resolving into the skeletal shapes of man-made decay. Corroded iron buildings, a skeletal radio mast, and the hulking forms of what he knew were rendering vats. The station crouched on a spit of black volcanic rock, a century-old scar that refused to heal. The plane's skis made contact with a brutal scrape, sliding across the wind-scoured ice of the prepared runway. The engines spooled down, and a profound silence rushed in to fill the void. It was a heavy, pressing quiet, thick enough to feel against the eardrums. Kalen pushed the door open and a savage cold assaulted him. It was a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs and pricking his exposed cheeks with 1,000 tiny needles. Harris and his co-pilot began unloading the crates with practiced efficiency. Kalen's life for the next 12 months was contained in those boxes: freeze-dried rations, fuel canisters, thermal gear, medical supplies, and the most precious cargo of all, the carefully packed cases containing the iris. His large-format camera, a beautiful instrument of mahogany and brass, along with hundreds of glass plates and the volatile chemicals for his darkroom. "Sat phone connection is spotty this time of year," Harris said, his breath a plume of white. "Dr. Morley said to expect your check-in within 48 hours. She'll raise the alarm if she hears nothing." Kalen gave a curt nod. He wanted them gone. He craved the solitude he had come for. Right then, Harris clapped his gloved hands together. "The generator is in the main barracks. Keys are on the hook. Good luck, Mr. Rourke. See you next summer." The twin otter turned, its engines screaming back to life. It lifted off the ice, a tiny, defiant speck against the colossal indifference of the continent. It vanished. Kalen Rourke was alone. He stood for a long moment, letting the sheer scale of his isolation settle into his bones. The wind was the only moving thing, a relentless river of air that moaned through the rusted struts of the radio mast. He pulled his parka tighter and began the arduous task of dragging his supplies towards the largest building, the one designated on his map as the mess hall and barracks. The main door groaned open on corroded hinges. The air inside was colder than the air outside, a dead, still cold that had not been disturbed in decades. A faint, cloying scent hung in the atmosphere, a mix of rust, brine, and something else, something fatty and old. His boots crunched on a layer of frost and debris covering the floorboards. Long trestle tables stood in rows, their surfaces warped. Tin plates and mugs were scattered about, some still on the tables as if their owners had vanished mid-meal. On the far wall, a gallery of tin-type portraits stared out with faded, accusatory eyes. Young men and old men, bearded and grim, their expressions frozen for a century. He found the generator in a side room, a huge diesel beast coated in grime. After a struggle with the frozen fuel lines and a few choked coughs, it roared to life. A string of bare bulbs flickered on overhead, casting a jaundiced, depressing light over the scene. It did little to dispel the gloom. He spent the rest of the day, a meaningless distinction in the perpetual twilight of the Antarctic autumn, organizing his camp. He chose a small room off the main hall, cleared it of debris, and set up his cot. He established his darkroom in an adjacent pantry, its lack of windows perfect for his work. It was a methodical, physical labor that kept his mind from wandering. He did not permit it to wander. On the second day, he began his true work. He hauled the Iris out onto the ice, its heavy wooden tripod sinking slightly into the wind-packed snow. The station was his subject, Hekla's folly, a monument to greed and slaughter. His project was titled Decay and Permanence. He wanted to capture the slow, inexorable reclamation of man's hubris by nature, the way rust mimicked blood on the iron plates of the flensing deck, the way snow piled in soft, organic shapes against the hard lines of the buildings. The process was a ritual, a meditation. He framed the shot, adjusting the camera's position by millimeters. He'd retreat under the black focusing cloth, the world reduced to an inverted, shimmering image on the ground glass. He would insert the plate holder, pull the dark slide, and squeeze the shutter release. The click was a small, satisfying sound in the vast emptiness. His first subject was the row of colossal rendering vats. They stood like silent, iron gods on the edge of the shore, their sides streaked with orange and black. He spent hours getting the composition right, the low, gray sky providing a perfect, flat light. He made 3 exposures before the cold became too much to bear. Back in the pantry, he worked under the single red safe light. The smell of acetic acid and fixer filled the small space. He rocked the development tray with gentle precision, watching the image ghost into existence on the glass plate. The first 2 were perfect, sharp, detailed, capturing the texture of the rust, the subtle gradients of the sky. They were beautiful in their desolation. He slid the 3rd plate into the developer. The image began to appear, the dark shapes of the vats materializing from the creamy emulsion. But something was wrong. In the empty space between 2 of the vats, a place he knew was empty snow, there was a dark blemish. It was not a chemical stain. It was not a light leak. It was a vertical smear, a disturbance in the fabric of the image, like a brushstroke of pure black against the gray scale of the scene. It was slender and tall and had a shape that was almost deliberate. Kalen held the plate closer to the safe light, his heart a sudden heavy drum in his chest. He could see the fine grain of the snow around it. The detail on the vats was crisp. The smudge was part of the exposure. It was a flaw in reality captured on glass. He stared at it, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. He remembered the view through the lens. He remembered the empty space. The smudge should not be there. He set up the satellite phone that evening. After several failed attempts, a crackling voice came through the static. Kalen, is that you? This is Morley. Dr. Morley, yes, I'm here, I'm set up. His own voice sounded strange. Good to hear it. How are conditions? Cold, Kalen said. Quiet. That's the point, I suppose, her voice crackled. Everything in order, no surprises. Kalen looked at the flawed glass plate sitting on his workbench. The dark smear seemed to mock him from the other side of the room. No surprises, he lied. Everything is as expected. He spent the third day exploring, pushing the flawed photo from his mind. It was an equipment malfunction, nothing more. He forced himself into the other buildings. He found the flensing deck, a vast wooden platform stained almost black. Long grooves were carved into its surface, channels for blood and oil. He found the coopery, where barrels lay in stacks, and the forge, where a heavy anvil sat cold and patient. In the station manager's office, a small room with a window facing the sea, he found the desk. Most of its contents were a moldy ruin, but in the bottom drawer, encased in a solid block of ice, was a thick, leather-bound book. He chipped it free with the back of a hatchet and carried it into the warmth of the mess hall. He set it near the humming generator to thaw. It was the station's logbook. The name M. Hemstad was tooled into the cover. That night sleep offered little refuge. He dreamt of his daughter Maeve, not the accident, just her face, her smile. He awoke with a sharp intake of breath, the phantom feeling of her hand in his. The generator hummed its monotonous tune. The wind howled outside. He was gripped by a sudden, irrational certainty that he was not alone in the room. He sat up, scanning the shadows. There was nothing. Only the portraits on the far wall, their glass eyes seeming to catch the dim light. Driven by an unease he could not name, he returned to his darkroom. He picked up the flawed photograph. He had to prove it was a fluke. He dressed in his full thermal gear, grabbed the iris, and marched back out to the rendering vats. The wind was stronger now, driving pellets of snow that stung his face. He set the tripod in the exact same holes it had made before. He framed the shot identically. Under the focusing cloth, the world was gray and empty. The space between the vats was pristine snow. He made the exposure, then another. He rushed back to the darkroom, his movements jerky, frantic. He slid the first new plate into the developer, his hands shaking so much he sloshed some of the chemical onto the floor. He watched, holding his breath. The vats appeared. The snow appeared. The space between them was empty, perfect, clean. Relief washed over him, so potent it made him dizzy. It was a chemical flaw, a bad plate, nothing more. He let out a long, shuddering breath and reached for the second plate from his outdoor session. He developed it as well, just to be thorough. The image bloomed on the glass, the vats, the snow, and in the space between them the vertical black smear was present again. But it was different this time. It was darker, more defined. It was no longer a smudge, it was a shape. A tall, thin, featureless silhouette. A figure of absolute blackness standing patiently in the desolate landscape where nothing should be. Kalen stared, his blood turning to ice. The first photo was not a fluke. It was an introduction. Chapter 2: Stains on the Silver. The photograph was a declaration of war on his sanity. Kalen spent the next cycle of light and dark oscillating between frigid denial and hot panic. He examined the glass plate with a magnifying loupe, searching for any physical explanation. A scratch in the emulsion, a hair on the lens. There was nothing. The figure, he was calling it a figure now, was woven into the very fabric of the image, as real and present as the rust on the vats it stood beside. His logical mind, the part of him that understood apertures and exposure times, screamed that it was impossible. His grieving heart, the part that knew the world could break its own rules, whispered that it was not. He tried to focus on the project. He photographed the bone yard, a grotesque expanse behind the station where the colossal vertebrae and ribs of whales erupted from the snow like the ruins of a Paleolithic cathedral. The resulting images were stark and beautiful, and to his profound relief, empty of anomalies. He photographed the interior of the mess hall, the long tables, the silent portraits, all normal. He began to believe he could control it. The entity, whatever it was, seemed tied to that one specific location by the rendering vats. He decided to avoid it. The station was vast, a feast of decay. He had a year's worth of subjects without ever going near that spot again. The manager's logbook had thawed completely. The leather cover was stiff and wrinkled, but the pages inside were remarkably preserved by the ice. The handwriting was a precise, elegant script, the ink faded but legible. It belonged to Magnus Hemstad, station manager, 1911. October 17th. The last supply ship has departed. We are 38 souls committed to Hecla's Folly for the season. The crew is in good spirits. The hold is full of coal, the larder is stocked. God willing, it will be a profitable and uneventful winter. Kalin read for hours, engrossed. Hemstad was a man of detail and routine. He chronicled weather patterns, coal consumption, barrels of oil rendered, and minor disputes among the crew. He described the brutal, methodical work of the whale hunt, the chase in the open boats, the thunder of the harpoon gun, the gruesome task of towing the carcass back to the station. He wrote of the flensers, men who worked knee-deep in gore, stripping the blubber with long-handled knives. He described the rendering vats, the tripods, and the ceaseless, choking black smoke they produced. November 5th. 5 blue whales taken this week. A good haul. The flensing deck runs red from dawn to dusk. Gilly Cole, our head flenser, is a brute of a man but peerless with his blade. The air is thick with the smell of boiling oil. Some of the new men cannot keep their food down. They will learn or they will not last. As Kalin read, the station around him seemed to gain a new, phantom dimension. He could almost hear the clang of the forge, the shouts of men, the groan of the winch hauling a leviathan from the bloody surf. The faint, fatty smell in the air became heavier, more pronounced. One afternoon, seeking a new perspective, he climbed a slick, treacherous ladder to the roof of the main barracks. From there, he had a panoramic view of the station and the sea ice stretching to the horizon. The wind was a physical force, threatening to peel him from his perch. He was setting up the Iris, anchoring its tripod with small sandbags, when he saw movement on the ice. It was huge, a torpedo of mottled gray flesh moving with startling speed. It slid from the water onto a large ice floe perhaps 200 yards away, a leopard seal. But it was bigger than any he had ever seen in photographs, a monstrous bull with a thick, scarred neck and a head like a reptilian dog. It moved with an unnerving confidence, a true apex predator. Kalin watched, fascinated. This was a shot he had to get. He adjusted his camera, swapping to a longer lens. He ducked under the focusing cloth. The world snapped into inverted clarity. The seal was there, its massive form dominating the glass. It raised its head, its maw splitting into a terrifying snake-like yawn revealing rows of sharp tricuspid teeth, and then its head swiveled. Its dark, intelligent eyes seemed to lock directly onto his position on the roof. A shiver, completely unrelated to the cold, traced a path down Kalen's spine. He stayed motionless. The seal did not move. It simply watched him, a silent, unblinking sentinel. He named it in that moment the Pale Stalker. He abandoned the shot. The creature's gaze was too direct, too knowing. He felt like prey. He packed his equipment and descended the ladder, his hands clumsy on the icy rungs. He did not look towards the ice floe again. That night, the first major storm of the season hit. The wind shrieked, a physical voice that battered the walls of the barracks. Snow, as fine as sand, forced its way through infinitesimal cracks in the window frames and door jambs, dusting the floor in white powder. The building groaned and shuddered like a dying beast. Kalen lay on his cot, listening, the sound a symphony of destruction. Over the cacophony he heard a new sound, a heavy, wet, scraping noise. It was close. It was coming from directly beneath his room. Scrape, drag, scrape. His breath caught in his throat. The floor of the station was raised on thick wooden pylons, creating a crawl space underneath, open to the elements. Something was moving down there, something large. He thought of the Pale Stalker. He pictured its massive body dragging itself across the frozen ground and rocks, its claws scrabbling for purchase. Was it trying to get in? Was it drawn by the warmth of the generator? He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and his sharpest hand axe, his knuckles white around the handle. He crept from his room into the main hall. The wind howled. The scraping sound was gone, swallowed by the storm. He stood motionless for a full minute, his ears straining. Nothing. Had he imagined it? Was the storm playing tricks on him? He returned to his room, but not to sleep. He sat on his cot, the axe across his lap, until the gray light of morning filtered through the grimy window. The storm had passed. A fresh, deep layer of snow blanketed everything, softening the harsh angles of the station. He forced himself outside, circling the barracks. He found the tracks immediately, not the neat paw prints of a fox or the webbed feet of a bird. These were wide, deep furrows in the snow, accompanied by the distinct drag marks of a heavy body and the sharp gouges of powerful claws. They led from the sea directly to the crawl space beneath his room. And then they led away again, back towards the water's edge. The Pale Stalker had been here. It had been right under his feet. A new, primal layer of fear established itself in his mind. The entity in his photographs was a terror for the soul. The Pale Stalker was a terror for the flesh. He was being hunted from two different realities at once. He found solace in the logbook. Magnus Hemstad's orderly world was a comfort, but the entries were beginning to change. December 1st. The sun has left us. We now live in perpetual twilight. A strange mood has settled over the men. A kind of lethargy, a shadow sickness, some of the old hands call it. They are quiet, watchful. Fights break out over nothing. Father Ivo tries to keep spirits up, but his faith seems a thin coat against this cold. December 12th. One of the Norwegians, Lars, claims to see things in the aurora. Not just lights, he says. Faces. Great, swimming faces in the sky. He was laughed at, but now two other men claim the same. I have confined Lars to his bunk. Hysteria is a disease we cannot afford. The mention of the aurora piqued Kalen's interest. He had yet to capture a good display. He checked the meteorological reports on his laptop. A solar storm was predicted for the coming night, a perfect opportunity. He spent the day preparing, setting up the iris on a high point of rock overlooking the station. When darkness fell, the sky began to glow. Faint green curtains shimmered into existence, growing in intensity. Kalen worked quickly, making several long exposures. The beauty of it was breathtaking, a silent, celestial ballet. It almost made him forget the dread that now lived in his gut. As he was packing up, a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision caught his attention. He turned. The pale stalker was there at the base of the rock 100 feet below him. It was just sitting there in the snow, illuminated by the ghostly green light of the aurora, watching him. Its presence was a cold weight, a promise of violence. Kalen retreated to his darkroom, his hands trembling again. He developed the aurora plates. The first was magnificent, the green ribbons of light perfectly captured above the dark silhouettes of the station buildings. But as he examined it, he saw something within the lights. Faint, curved lines, shapes that were too organic, too ordered to be natural. It was like the ghost of something impossibly large swimming through the sky. He remembered the logbook, great, swimming faces in the sky. He felt a sudden, urgent need to talk to someone. He fired up the sat phone. Morley here. Her voice was a welcome anchor to the real world. It's Kalen. Everything all right? You sound strained. I'm fine. The storm was rough, but the generator held. He hesitated. Dr. Morley, the old logbook for this station. Are there any other copies? In a museum, maybe. There was a pause. Hekla's Folly, I don't think so. That was a Norwegian outfit, went bankrupt in 1913. Most of their records were lost. Why? Just curious about the history. He couldn't tell her. She would think he was losing his mind. She would pull him out. The thought of leaving, of admitting defeat, was somehow more terrifying than staying. Well, be careful you don't get too lost in the past, she said, her tone softening slightly. It's a lonely place. Don't forget to talk to me. That's what I'm here for. The call ended, leaving him more isolated than before. He had one more task for the night, an experiment, a test. He took the iris and set it up in his own small room. He pointed it at his empty cot, the rumpled sleeping bag, the worn backpack leaning against the wall. He adjusted the focus, the mundane details of his existence sharp and clear on the ground glass. He inserted a plate, made the exposure, and took it to the darkroom. His heart hammered against his ribs as he rocked the developer tray. The image resolved itself slowly. The cot, the sleeping bag, the backpack, and standing beside the cot, one of its featureless black hands seeming to almost touch the pillow where he laid his head, was the tall, slender shape of the negative. It was in his room. It had followed him from the vats. The rule he had invented, the safe zone, was a fiction. There was no safe zone. Kalen stumbled back from the developing tray, a choked gasp escaping his lips. He slammed into the pantry wall, the shelves rattling. He stared at the image, at the simple, domestic scene corrupted by an impossible presence. It was not hunting him. It was waiting for him. Chapter 3: The Manager's Eye. The photograph of his own room broke something in Kalen. The carefully constructed wall between his work and his life crumbled into dust. The entity was not a localized phenomenon to be studied from a safe distance. It was an infestation. His sanctuary was violated. His camera, his trusted iris, had become a conspirator, showing him a truth he could not see and could not escape. Sleep became a frantic, shallow exercise. He would lie on his cot, every nerve ending alive, staring at the empty space beside his bed where the photograph said the figure stood. Every creak of the old building was its footstep. Every moan of the wind was its voice. He started sleeping with the hand axe on his chest. He abandoned any pretense of his original project. Decay and permanence was a foolish academic notion now. His new project had no name, only a single driving purpose: to document the intruder, to capture it, to understand it, to prove it. He began to treat the negative like a rare, nocturnal animal. He set up the iris in different locations throughout the station: the silent forge, the barrel-filled coopery, the blood-stained flensing deck, leaving it for hours to make long, patient exposures. The results were a gallery of escalating horror. A shot of the forge revealed the dark figure standing before the cold anvil, its form obscuring the tools hung on the wall behind it. A view down the main hall showed it at the far end, a pillar of shadow amongst shadows. Each time he captured it, it seemed a little sharper, a little more defined, as if his attention were feeding it, pulling it into clearer focus. His only respite was the logbook. He devoured Magnus Hemstad's words, searching for clues, for kinship in madness. The manager's entries grew more erratic as the polar night deepened. January 4th. Another man has the shadow sickness. Young Finn, the cabin boy. He sits and stares at the wall for hours. He claims a man with no face watches him from the corners of the room. I had Father Ivo speak with him, but the boy is inconsolable. The priest is as much use as a prayer in a blizzard. January 19th. The Great Seal returned today. The men call it Drogen, the ghost. It is unnaturally cunning. It took one of our dogs from the kennel, tore the chain from the wall. The men are terrified of it. They refuse to venture out alone. Gilly Cole swore an oath to kill it. He spends his days sharpening harpoons. Kalen read the entry on the seal and a cold dread washed over him. He went to the mess hall window. Out on the ice, the pale stalker was there. It had dragged a fresh kill, another seal, onto a floe and was tearing it apart, its white fur stained bright red. It was real. Hemstad's Drogen and his pale stalker had to be one and the same. A creature of unnatural longevity and malice, haunting this cursed shore for over a century. The parallels were too strong to ignore. He was the new Lars, seeing things in the sky. He was the new Finn, seeing a man with no face. The station wasn't just haunted. It was a machine designed to break the minds of those trapped within it, and it was working on him as it had on the whalers. His next call with Morley was strained. Kalen, your last email was cryptic. Are you getting enough to eat? Are you sleeping? Her voice was laced with genuine concern. I'm documenting things you wouldn't believe, Genevieve, he said, his voice low and intense. Things the camera sees but the eye can't. What are you talking about? Lens flare, light leaks. No, it's a figure, a presence. And there's an animal, a seal, it's... Intelligent, it's stalking me. It was in the original station logbook, too. There was a long silence on the line filled with static that sounded like whispering. "Kalen," Morley said, her voice careful, measured. "You've been alone for months. The isolation, the darkness. It can have profound psychological effects. It's called the third man factor. Explorers often sense a presence that isn't there." "This isn't in my head," he snapped, his voice louder than he intended. "I have proof, I have photographs." "Okay, Kalen, okay. Calm down. When you transmit your next data packet, send me one of these photos. Let me see what you're seeing." The conversation left him trembling with rage and frustration. She thought he was crazy. The condescending, clinical tone of her voice. He would show her. He would send her the sharpest, most undeniable image he had. He spent the next 2 days hunting for the perfect shot, a new frenzy in his work. He became reckless, ignoring the cold, forgetting to eat. He set up inside the rendering vat building, the air thick with the phantom stench of boiled flesh. He positioned the iris, pointing it through a grime-caked window towards the bone yard. He ducked under the focusing cloth. The skeletal landscape of whale ribs was sharp and clear. He was about to make the exposure when a shadow fell over him. He froze. The only light source was the window in front of him. Nothing should be behind him. Slowly, he lifted his head from under the cloth. The pale stalker was there, its massive head and shoulders filling the doorway of the building. It had moved with absolute silence. It blocked his only exit. Its black eyes held no warmth, only a cold, predatory intelligence. A low growl rumbled in its chest. Kalen scrambled backwards, tripping over a pile of rusted chain. The axe. He had left it in the barracks. He had nothing but the heavy, cumbersome tripod to defend himself. The seal slid forward, its bulk seeming to fill the entire space. It was not just an animal, it was a monster. Kalen could smell its breath, a foul mix of fish and blood. It opened its mouth, and the growl became a horrifying, guttural roar that echoed off the iron walls. He crab-walked away, his back hitting the curved wall of a rendering vat. He was trapped. The seal lunged. Kalen swung the heavy tripod in a desperate arc. The solid mahogany legs connected with the side of the creature's head with a sickening crack. The seal roared in pain and fury, shaking its massive head. It hesitated for a fraction of a second, stunned. It was the only chance he would get. Kalen scrambled to his feet and sprinted for the door, shoving past the creature's bulk. He burst out into the blinding white, not daring to check behind him. He ran, his lungs burning, his boots slipping on the ice. He did not stop until he was safely inside the barracks, the heavy door barred shut. He collapsed against it, his body shaking uncontrollably. The logbook had called it Drogen, a ghost. It felt like one, a physical, unstoppable revenant. He stayed inside for 2 full days, nursing his terror. He only ventured out for fuel for the generator. He spent the time reading, seeking refuge in Hemstad's methodical script. February 10th. Cole failed to kill the beast. It ambushed him near the shore, broke his leg in 2 places. He is lucky to be alive. The man's pride is shattered. He just lies in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, clutching the harpoon he failed to use. February 21st. The sickness is spreading. More men see the shadow man. They refuse to work in the sheds alone. Productivity has plummeted. There is talk of a curse, that we have angered the spirits of the great whales with our butchery. Father Ivo holds services, but the chapel is half empty. The men prefer to trust their superstitions. The logbook had become his Bible and his curse. He treated it with a ritualistic reverence, turning its stiff pages with care. One evening, as he sat reading by the light of a single bulb, he noticed something impossible. The ink at the bottom of the page he was reading was darker than the rest. It looked fresh. He touched it. It did not smudge. He turned the page. The entry for March 1st, 1912, was about dwindling coal supplies. He turned back. The last line on the page for February 28th had not been there before. He was sure of it. His blood ran cold. Written in the same, precise script as all the other entries were new words. The photographer grows thin. He wastes plates on the shadows. He reads my words and thinks he understands. He does not. The beast on the ice is but a dog. The true master of this place has no teeth. Kalin dropped the book as if it were burning hot. It fell to the floor with a heavy thud. He stared at it, his mind reeling. It wasn't just a record, it was aware. Magnus Hemstad's ghost wasn't just an echo in the building, it was alive, reciting in the pages of his own journal, watching him, and it was writing. He backed away from the book slowly, a low sound of pure terror escaping his throat. He looked around the empty mess hall, at the silent, watching portraits. He was a character in a story that had already been written, a play that had been performed before. And now, the author was adding new lines just for him. Chapter 4: The Red Door. The living logbook shattered the last remnants of Kalin's rational mind. He was no longer an observer of a haunting. He was a participant in a conversation across time. Magnus Hemstad was watching him, judging him, commenting on his every move from the ambered pages of the past. The sense of being scrutinized was absolute, a constant pressure at the back of his neck. He stopped sleeping. He survived on stale coffee and a burning, obsessive energy. Paranoia was his constant companion. He would whip his head around in the middle of a task, certain that Hemstad himself was standing just behind him. He began talking to the portraits in the mess hall, demanding answers from their faded, silent faces. His work with the iris grew more frantic. He had to show Morley. He had to show someone. He set up his camera on its tripod in the mess hall, aimed at the wall of portraits. He wanted to see if the negative would appear amongst the ghosts of the past. As he fiddled with the focus, he noticed something through the ground glass. The heavy tripod was in the shot, and something was wrong with it. One of the brass fittings, a locking screw, was moving. It was slowly, deliberately being turned. Kalin pulled his head from under the cloth. The screw was motionless. He ducked back under. The inverted image showed it turning again. His gaze traced up from the tripod. In the photo's world, a long, slender, featureless black arm was reaching out from the shadows, its dark fingers wrapped around the brass fitting, adjusting his camera. He let out a choked cry and scrambled away from the camera, kicking it over. The iris, his beautiful, trusted instrument, crashed to the floor. The mahogany body splintered. The lens cracked. He stared at the wreckage, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It had touched his camera. It was interacting with his world. The barrier was dissolving. He left the camera where it lay. He didn't care. His only concern now was the logbook. It held the key. He snatched it from the floor and began reading with a feverish intensity, packing the length of the hall. He was searching for an answer, a weapon, an escape. March 5th. 3 men are now refusing to leave the barracks. They have barricaded themselves in their room. They say the shadow is growing bolder. They say it can touch things now. They say it comes from behind the red door. Kalen stopped packing. The red door. He had seen it. In the back of the provision shed, a building he had only briefly explored, there was a single door painted a deep, signal red, a stark slash of color in the monochrome world of rust and frost. The whaler's logs had warned against it. March 7th. I have forbidden anyone from approaching the red door. Gilly Cole, in a fit of drunken bravado, tried to break it down. The wood is iron hard. He barely scratched it. He claims he heard something on the other side. A scratching. Like a rat, he said, but bigger. That was it, the source. The nexus of the station's sickness. Kalen's mind, stripped of reason, seized upon this single, tangible objective. He had to get through that door. He found the provision shed, a long, low building filled with the debris of a century. Rotting canvas, broken barrels, coils of stiff rope, and at the far end the red door. It was made of thick, heavy planks, banded with rusted iron. A heavy padlock, a solid block of rust, secured it. It looked ancient and inviolable. He returned to the barracks and grabbed a heavy crowbar from the workshop. For the rest of the day he waged war on the door. The padlock shattered after a dozen brutal blows, but the door itself was another matter. It was swollen in its frame, sealed tight by decades of frost and pressure. He slammed the crowbar against it, the impacts echoing through the silent shed. Wood splintered. Rust flaked away, but the door held. His obsession was total. He ignored the gnawing hunger in his belly, the crippling exhaustion in his limbs. As twilight fell, he brought a lantern and continued his assault. The pale stalker appeared at the far end of the shed, its dark form silhouetted in the entrance. It watched him, its head cocked, a silent observer of his madness. Kalen screamed at it, a raw, wordless sound of fury and frustration. The beast simply watched, its presence a calm counterpoint to his frenzy. Finally, with a sound like a gunshot, the lock mechanism inside the door shattered. The door swung inward a few inches, releasing a puff of stale, cold air that smelled of dust and something else. Something dry and ancient. Kalen shoved it open. He held his lantern high. He was met with crushing disappointment. The room was small, a cube no more than 10 feet on a side, and it was empty. Bare stone walls, a stone floor, no furniture, no creature, nothing. He slumped against the door frame, defeated. A wave of despair washed over him. He had been wrong. It was all in his head. The logbook was just a book. The photos were just flaws. He stepped inside, his boots crunching on the dusty floor. He ran his hand along the cold stone wall. His fingers caught on something, a groove. He brought the lantern closer. The wall was not smooth. It was covered in carvings. He held the lantern high, his eyes wide. Every square inch of the 3 walls was a chaotic tapestry of images, scratched into the stone with a nail or a knife tip. They were crude, frantic, and horrifying. Hundreds of images of the whale hunts. harpoons sinking into flesh, boats being smashed by giant flukes, men drowning in a bloody sea. The sheer, concentrated violence of the carvings was overwhelming. And in the center of the back wall, dominating the mural of slaughter, was one large, carefully carved image. It was a tall, slender figure, the negative, but here it was rendered with terrifying detail he had never seen in his photos. It had no face, but lines radiated from its head like a black sun, a crown of darkness. And from its body, long tendrils snaked out, touching every scene of death, connecting the men, the boats, and the dying whales to its own form. It was not just a witness. It was the cause. It was a god of pain, feeding on the station's agony. Kalen backed away slowly, his breath held tight in his chest. He understood now. The station was a temple, the slaughter was the offering, and the red door was the entrance to the Holy of Holies. He had to photograph it. He needed the world to see this. He scrambled from the room, leaving the door agape. He ran back to the barracks, to the wreckage of his camera. He worked with a surgeon's focus, his earlier despair replaced by a white-hot purpose. He pieced the iris back together using duct tape and wire. The crack in the lens remained, a spiderweb flaw, but the body was stable. It would work. It had to work. He carried the patched-up camera to the provision shed. The pale stalker was gone. He set up the tripod in the center of the small, carved room. The air was frigid, but he did not notice. He ducked under the focusing cloth. The world turned upside down. The carvings filled the ground glass, a testament to a century of madness. He inserted his last precious glass plate. He held his breath. He squeezed the shutter release. He worked in a fever dream, stumbling back to his darkroom. He didn't care about the red safe light anymore. He worked in near darkness, his hands moving on their own. He slid the plate into the developer. He rocked the tray, his eyes fixed on the emulsion. The image appeared. The carved walls, sharp and clear despite the cracked lens. The chaotic scenes of death. The central figure of the dark god. But the room in the photograph was not empty. Standing in the center of the room, exactly where his camera had been, was the negative. Its form was no longer a smudge or a silhouette. It was perfectly, horribly sharp. It was as if it had posed for the portrait. And it was different this time. Before, it had always been in profile or facing away. Now it was turned towards the camera. Its featureless head was tilted, as if examining the lens. As if it were looking right at him, through the camera, through time, through the fragile boundary of reality. It saw him. It finally truly saw him. As he stared at the impossible image, a sound cut through the silence of the station. It was shrill, electronic, and brutally loud. The satellite phone was ringing. Chapter 5: The Final Exposure. The ringing of the sat phone was a physical shock. Kalen dropped the photograph. It clattered to the floor, the glass plate cracking, but he didn't care. He scrambled out of the darkroom, stumbling over boxes, and snatched the handset from its cradle. "Morley," he gasped, his voice a raw croak. "Kalen, thank God." Her voice was frantic, tinny with satellite delay. "We lost your signal for 3 days. I was about to send Harris. What is happening? Your last transmission, the photos. Kalen, what was on them?" He saw the images flash in his mind. The smudge, the silhouette, the figure in his room, the final, clear portrait in the carved chamber. How could he explain it? "You have to get me out of here," he said, the words tumbling out. "Genevieve, it's real, all of it. The logbook is writing itself. The thing in the photos, it's here. It sees me." "Kaelin, listen to me," she said, her voice tight with forced calm. "You are having a psychotic break. It's the isolation. It's documented. We can get you help. Just hold on. Harris can be there in 36 hours. "No, you don't understand," he yelled, packing the floor, the phone cord tangling around his arm. "It's not in my head, it's the station. It's a machine, a trap. It feeds on suffering, the whales, the men, now me." Hemstad knew. He wrote it down. "Kaelin." A blast of static erupted from the phone, so loud it made him cry out and press the handset away from his ear. Through the electronic hash, another sound emerged. It was not Morley's voice. It was a low, mournful, resonant sound. A deep, groaning song filled with a pain so ancient and vast it was incomprehensible. It was the sound of a great whale dying, a sound that had soaked this ground for decades, now broadcast across the planet through a satellite. Then cutting through the whale's song came a high, thin screech, the sound of metal being tortured. The call went dead. Kaelin stared at the silent handset. The station had used his only link to the outside world to sing its own terrible song. He was completely, irrevocably cut off. There would be no rescue. Harris was not coming. Morley would assume he had perished in an accident, his mind already gone. He was part of the station now. Another ghost, another story to be absorbed into its history. A strange, terrifying peace settled over him. The frantic struggle was over. He knew his role. He was the final verse in a century-old song. He walked to the door of the barracks and pushed it open. The wind was sharp, the air clean and cold. He walked with a purpose he had not felt in months. He headed towards the shore ice, the hand axe swinging loosely in his grip. The pale stalker was there, lying on a large floe, a dark shape against the snow. It lifted its head as he approached. There was no growl this time, no threat display, just a calm, reptilian watchfulness. It knew this was the end. "It was you or me from the start, wasn't it?" Kaelin said, his voice quiet, carried away by the wind. "The guardian, the other prisoner." He stepped onto the ice floe. The creature rose to meet him, not with a lunge, but with a heavy, deliberate motion. It was a ritual, an execution. Kaelin raised the axe. The pale stalker opened its jaw. The final confrontation was a silent, brutal ballet of desperation against implacable force. The recovery team arrived 7 weeks later. The pilot, Harris, felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach as he circled the station. There was no sign of life, no smoke from the generator stack, just the same silent, decaying buildings he had left behind months ago. They found the main barracks door ajar, swinging gently in the wind. The inside was a wreck. Overturned furniture, scattered papers, a shattered large-format camera on the floor. It was clear Kaelin Rourke had lost his mind long before he had lost his life. They found his body in the small pantry he had converted into a darkroom. He was frozen solid, sitting on a small crate. His face was emaciated, his eyes wide open, staring at something only he could see. The coroner on the team listed cause of death as hypothermia and starvation, secondary to a severe psychotic episode. A tragic but not uncommon story for those who brave the continent alone. Outside, another team member found the carcass of a huge leopard seal washed up on the shore. Its skull was crushed, and it had a dozen deep wounds in its hide, but one of its flippers was wrapped in the tattered remains of a man's parka. They documented the scene, bagging evidence. One of them found the old leather logbook. He flipped through it, meticulous records of a whaling season from a century past. He noted the last entry, dated March 12, 1912, recording the station's closure for the season. He packed it into an evidence bag. The last thing they found was the camera. It was broken, but the final plate holder was still inside, the dark slide in place. It was a long shot, but the forensic team back in Christchurch might be able to recover an image. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the final record of Kaelin Rourke's final days. 2 weeks later, in a sterile lab far from the ice, a technician in a white coat carefully worked on the last glass plate from Hekla's Folly. He managed to develop it. The image was cracked and flawed from the damaged lens, but the content was shockingly clear. He called his supervisor over. Together they stared at the photograph. It was a self-portrait. Kaelin Rourke sat on a crate in a bare, dark room. He was gaunt, his eyes hollow but blazing with a terrifying, absolute certainty. He was looking directly into the lens, directly at them. And he was not alone. Standing behind him, one long, impossibly thin hand of pure blackness resting gently on his shoulder in a gesture of intimate possession, was the figure. It was tall and slender, a form of perfect, unholy shadow. It had no face, no features, only a smooth, dark void. But they both knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that it was smiling. The end.